I met my future wife when she came to work in my department. I liked Nancy immediately, and I began to seek her attention. 2 months later, we started a relationship, and 3 months later, I proposed to her, and we were married. At that time, I had a 3-room apartment, which was left by my grandmother. We started living in that apartment. Nancy had a 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, 30 minutes away, and we decided that we would put tenants in it so that the place would generate rental income. We had been married for 17 years and worked together in a good company. Financially, everything was fine. There was enough money for everything. We raised a son who entered and is studying at a military academy. Then one day, they decided to remodel the bedroom. In a couple of days, a construction crew was to arrive, and I began to slowly free all the closets. At that time, my wife had just left for a couple of hours to visit her parents. They live in the suburbs. While sorting out the shelves, I found a black bag. To be honest, I looked inside without a second thought. I just didn't know what box to put it in. There were a lot of letters in the bag. Some were in Nancy's handwriting. Some were written by someone else. I don't know why, but I started reading them. They were letters my wife had written to another man years ago, when of course we hadn't even known each other. She had written them to a soldier, obviously the man she loved at the time. There was so much love, tenderness, and passion in the letters that I was even confused. I had always thought that my wife was very reserved in showing her feelings and emotions, but it turned out that this was not the case. This guy, whose name was Max, also reciprocated her feelings. Anyway, I was absorbed in reading and didn't even hear Nancy come back. She yelled that she was mean, that how could I read other people's letters, that it was very personal and so on. Anyway, we had a big fight. We didn't speak for 2 weeks. I was ashamed. Why did I read those letters? That was 20 years ago. Anyway, it was what it was. The only thing that offended me was why Nancy had kept those letters so carefully. And all the loving words addressed to another man made me angry and jealous. In time, I apologized to my wife, and the whole affair was largely forgotten. Then, a month after that, I got a call from my downstairs neighbor saying she couldn't reach Nancy. She had a wet spot on her ceiling that was getting progressively bigger. What should she do? I knew immediately that this was Nancy's neighbor from the suburban apartment. So I replied, "Knock on the door. The tenants live there. See if everything is all right." The neighbor was very surprised and replied that no one had lived there for over a year. What tenants am I talking about? Now it was my turn to be surprised. I promised that I would be there in 30 minutes. While driving, I kept calling my wife, but her phone was off. After 40 minutes, I opened the door of the apartment I hadn't been in for a couple years. The first thing I saw were my wife's shoes and a man's sneakers. A million thoughts ran through my head. Was she having an affair? Was she with another man at this very moment? I moved silently through the apartment, noticing signs that someone was here, a sweater thrown on the couch, 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. As I approached the closed bedroom door, I heard quiet voices and laughter. I froze, feeling faint, then pushed the door open. My wife, Nancy, was sitting on the bed next to a rough-looking man I vaguely recognized. Shock was reflected on the faces of both of them, and they hurried to cover themselves. "Oh my God," gasped Nancy. "What are you doing here?" I froze in place, rage surging through me as I realized that this man was Max, her longtime lover from the letters. The letters she'd secretly kept all these years. "I have to ask you the same question," I growled through clenched teeth. "What the hell is going on here, Nancy?" She had the decency to look ashamed. "Honey, I can explain," she stammered. I interrupted her. "Can you explain why you're half naked in a secret apartment with your ex-boyfriend? Were you even going to tell me about it, or are you just going to keep betraying me behind my back?" "It's not what you think," Max said, standing up. "We just ran into each other recently and started chatting about old times." One thing led to another, and, "I'm sorry, man." I lunged at him in a rage, but Nancy yelled, "Stop." I froze. "It was my mistake," she said softly. "When Max contacted me a few months ago, all those old feelings flared up again. I thought I could keep that harmless friendship alive, but we both made the wrong choice. I never meant to hurt you." Her apology only made me angrier. "Don't try to downplay it, Nancy. You didn't just make a little mistake. You used your apartment to bring in lovers. Were you ever going to tell me? How could you do that? I thought we had something special." Tears glistened in her eyes, but I hardened my heart. She had brought this on herself. Max awkwardly slipped out, and Nancy and I continued to yell. After a heated argument, I walked away and my world crumbled around me. My wife, my best friend, the woman I trusted completely, had betrayed me without remorse. I didn't know how I could forgive this crime. For the next few days, I avoided Nancy, trying to deal with my simmering emotions, rage, bitterness, grief. Nancy called and texted constantly, begging me to meet so she could explain everything. After a week, emotionally exhausted, I agreed. I listened with a stone face as she told her side of the story, how she never stopped loving Max, and when they got back together, she couldn't resist, even though she knew how wrong it was. She cried, apologizing over and over, reaffirming that I was the love of her life, and it made her realize how much she had to lose. "I know I can't justify what I did," she finished. "All I can do is promise that I'm completely over Max, and try every day to rebuild your trust and make you believe that I want this marriage, because I do. I'll do anything." I was distraught. I still loved Nancy deeply, but I didn't know if I could survive this ultimate betrayal. We talked late into the night. I laid down strict conditions: no contact with Max, full access to her devices and accounts, and marriage counseling. Nancy agreed to every demand. She seemed truly willing to do her best to put our shattered marriage back together. So we slowly began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. Setbacks occurred. Fights broke out, and old wounds were opened. But gradually Nancy revealed herself, becoming unflinchingly honest and vulnerable. My respect and affection for her grew, though I remained wary. In time, forgiveness, not reconciliation, became possible. Trust would have to be earned daily, perhaps for years. But as Nancy and I reconnected emotionally and physically, I began to believe we could heal from this. Our marriage could grow stronger. The road ahead remains long and difficult, but hard work brings real results. Our relationship is thriving now more than ever after going through the fire. And Nancy continues to show me every day in small ways that she is set for the long haul.